For decades, the Adidas Copa Mundial has been the go-to football boot for players looking for something simple. But competition in the market has grown a lot recently, and now consumers have way more choice. And one of the most compelling new options is the New Balance 442 V2 Pro. And although these boots do have a lot of similarities, they may be more different than you initially think. So in this video, we're going to do a deep dive into all the features of these two football boots to see which one is going to be the better option for you. So let's start off by talking about the design of these two football boots. And you can tell just by looking at them that these two boots have a really similar design. For example, they both have full kangaroo leather uppers, really similar stitching throughout the toe box, as well as traditional centralized lacing systems. Even the sole plates on the two boots appear to be pretty similar. They both have conical studs, the only main difference being that the New Balance has 11 conical studs, whereas the Copa Mundial has 12. But that is pretty much where the similarities between these boots end. And when it comes to differences made in the design, there's one that's going to stand out more than others, and that's going to be the weight. The New Balance 442 V2 Pro is simply a much lighter football boot, and you can tell when you're holding the boots, and you can also tell when you've got them on feet. And so where is that weight saving going to be coming from with these two boots that have what seems to be a pretty similar design? Well, most of that weight savings comes from the sole plate tooling. So these both have synthetic toolings here for the sole plate, but the plastic used on the 442 V2 Pros is a lot more thin, it's a lot more rigid as well. So essentially in the heel area, this boot has a really thin layer of hard plastic here that has almost no give whatsoever. And then towards the toe box, you'll have a little bit of flexibility there. Whereas in the Copa Mundial, you have first off a much thicker sole plate, so that's going to contribute to the Copas being a lot heavier, and they are a little bit more pliable as well, so you get a little bit more bend through the heel and a little flexion through the toe box as well. I wouldn't say it's a floppy sole plate by any means, but compared to the plastic tooling on the 442, the New Balance boots just have way more thin, more modern, rigid sole plate. Then another difference we can discuss is the leather that's used in the upper. Now, although these are both kangaroo leather uppers that have similar stitching, I wouldn't say the leather feels exactly the same. For example, on the Copa Mundials, it's a little bit firmer and I'd say harder to the touch. Not necessarily in a bad way. I think the leather on the Copa Mundials actually has a really premium feel to it. I like that it's a little bit thicker. It just has that really nice kind of minimal give to it that a traditional leather football boot would have. Then the leather on the 442 V2 Pros, I'd say is a little bit softer and more plush to the touch. Also not a bad thing, it just feels a little bit different, more of a thin, softer feeling. And then another major difference between these two boots is the tongue that's used just beneath the central lacing system. So with the Copa Mundial, you have this nice leather material that's stitched onto the traditional fold-over tongue. This is as retro a tongue as you can get on a football boot. It has that classic fold-over aesthetic, which you can use once you've tied the boots. It'll give you a little bit more of a clean striking surface, but overall, it's pretty much just for the novelty of it. It's a decent tongue, although it can just be a little bit bulky at times that I've noticed. When you compare that to the more modern tongue that's on the 442 V2 Pros, this is a very thin synthetic, so it's not made of leather. And although it seemed a little bit floppy at first, it's actually a really, really solid tongue. When you tie these boots up and you pull the laces tighter, the tongue just really wraps all throughout your midfoot, and it helps contribute to the lockdown and makes these boots feel really snug around your feet. Then moving on from the tongue, we can talk about the laces on these two boots, which are also pretty different. You can see here, just from me holding up these boots, the laces on the Copas go several inches past the 442s. The Copa Mundial has just some of the longest laces I've ever seen. I've talked about this before on the previous review I've done on these boots. They're so long that when I've worn these boots on the field, I have to wrap them under the sole plate and then tie a knot just so that I don't have extra lace that I'm tripping on. So I wish that the Copas did ship with slightly shorter, more modern laces. When you compare those to the laces on the 442s, these are a really thin synthetic, and they actually have another pretty cool feature where the laces are thinner and more minimal throughout the lacing system here. And then as they go through like the last hole here, where the material you actually be using to tie your shoes, they thicken up a little bit just to make it easier to handle and get those knots. So it's a really small feature, but I do appreciate that. I think the lacing system is just generally an improvement in the 442s compared to the Copa Mundials. And then finally, the last difference I'd like to note with the design is just the insoles here. With the 442 V2 Pro, you do have a thin removable foam insert here, whereas on the Copa Mundials, you do not have a removable insole here. So that's one thing I would have liked Adidas to add here, because after using the boots for several months, you are gonna run into wearing down that insole, and so it's nice to have them replaceable. So now that we've gotten the chance to discuss the design of these two boots, let's move on to the build quality. So both the New Balance and the Copa Mundial, they are mid-price point football boots, so they come in a decent amount over $100, so you would expect them to have pretty good build quality, and thankfully they both do. Now, if I were to analyze the build of both the boots individually, I would say the Copa Mundials, first off, they are just absolutely built like a tank. I already talked about how thick and durable the leather feels throughout the upper, but that's just not where the build quality ends on these boots. The sole here, although it is pretty thick and pretty heavy, it's so well adhered to the upper on these boots. And what I mean by that is there's almost no sole separation that you get after wearing these boots for a long period of time. And if you've worn any pair of football boots, even modern football boots made of synthetics or leather, sole separation is such a frustrating problem. And usually it's the first thing to break on your football boots that results in you having to get a new pair. And I've worn these for almost 2 years straight through multiple seasons, and there's just almost no sole separation whatsoever. And I think the main reason for that is if you look at the top of the toe box here, there's these 3 short metal studs here that create an adhesive effect between the upper and the sole plate. And what I think those screws essentially do is they just make it so that it's really hard for that leather to separate near the toe box. I think it's great, and these boots, although they are a little bit looking worse for wear, I have beat them up a lot, they're still wearable after years of play, and I can't applaud the build quality enough on the Copa Mundials. Now, as far as the build quality on the 442 V2 Pros, these are boots that I'm still breaking in. I've had these for close to 2 months now, so I've had several chances to go out and play with them. As you can see, they are no longer the white that they once used to be, but the build quality on these is still really solid. I will say that the stitching is just as high quality as what you would see in the Copa Mundial. I can't speak to the sole separation as much yet. I haven't noticed anything during the time I've been wearing them, so hopefully that stays to be the same. But the highlight as far as build quality goes is gonna be the more modern sole plate they have here. I would say the sole plate on the 442s, although it looks pretty, unbecoming, it looks really simple. It's just as good as almost any sole plate tooling that you would get on, a more aggressive speed boot from like Nike or Puma or even Adidas. It's super, super light, super rigid. You can even look at the Soccer Reviews For You channel. He did a comparison where he weighed these football boots, and I think it was the Nike Mercurial Vapor, and they were literally only a few grams apart. It was so surprising because these are not marketed as being extremely lightweight boots. But it just goes to show that marketing doesn't mean everything, and you can still get a really light, really aggressive leather football boot just like this, and you don't have to sacrifice weight savings. So now that we've touched on build quality, the next thing we're going to talk about is the comfort of these boots. So just to start off, I want to say that both of these boots really excel as far as comfort is concerned. They're 2 of the more comfortable boots that I've been able to try on recently. But getting into some of the more unique aspects as far as comfort goes with these 2 boots, starting off with the Copas, the first thing that you have to know if you're ever planning on buying a pair of these boots is the stretch in the leather here. So I typically wear a 10.5 size US, and I decided to size down when buying these boots because they felt pretty big in the store. So I bought a size 10 US, just a half size down. And after wearing these boots for about 2 to 3 months, they expanded considerably to the point where I still had a lot of extra space in front of my toes. They still felt really comfortable, but it's important to know that you really should size down at least a half size from what you would normally wear. I would even say if you have narrow feet, perhaps to even go a full size down, just to make sure that you get a good fit from these boots. And if you don't know, I do have pretty wide feet, and the Copa Mundials fit me really, really well. It does take them, I'd say, a few sessions just to start to mold to your feet, as is pretty similar with any leather football boot. But once they do mold to your feet, as I said, they stretch out a lot. So if you have wider foot shape or a narrower foot shape, they should be pretty accommodating for you regardless. And next up, we're talking about the comfort on the 442 V2 Pros. So these felt great when I tried them on for the first time. The leather is just really, really soft, really plush, as I mentioned earlier. I love that snap you get from the sole plate when you put them on as well. It's different than almost any leather football boot I've tried on recently. The only thing I will note as a possible con here as far as comfort is concerned is there's a little bit of irritation I found in the heel area the first 2 times I was wearing these boots, the first couple training sessions. It only came, I'd say, after about half an hour to an hour of wearing the boots for a while. I got a little bit of rubbing in the back of my heel area, but now that I'm used to the boots and they've broken in, I don't feel that problem as much anymore. And as far as whether or not the 442s are going to accommodate your foot shape, I will say that New Balance has a pretty wide base model just in their regular football boots, but if you have particularly wide feet, you can get the wide variation as well. I actually opted to go with the wide variation on these boots just to try them out, and they had plenty of space in the toe box. So it's pretty cool that New Balance offers that, because I think they're one of the only football boot companies where you can get a wide variation of their most popular models. But overall, I'd say regardless of your foot type, the lacing system here is, it's traditional, it's centralized, and so you can pull these boots tight enough to give you enough lockdown regardless of your foot shape. So on to performance. How did I feel when I was playing and training in these football boots? So overall, as I just mentioned, since both of these are both really comfortable football boots, they're gonna allow you to play at your best, because in my opinion, as long as the boots you're wearing are comfortable, they're gonna allow you to excel. But just to note some of the small differences I did experience with these boots, I will say, as I mentioned earlier, the Copa Mundial is heavier. It's a noticeably heavier boot, so you will notice a slight difference on feet when moving between these two boots. And also, because the insole is not removable, since I wore these boots for several seasons, I did wear down the insole here. So I did start to get a little bit of stud pressure just because I've worn down the insole. And that stud pressure was mostly in the forefoot area near the front. But other than that, the leather started to mold to my feet after a few wears. They were really comfortable to play in. And as is the same with any kangaroo leather football boot, they're gonna offer you a really clean and nice touch on the ball. Then moving on to the unique performance aspects of the 442s. So these are gonna be lighter than the Copa Mundials, but more importantly, they're gonna be much more aggressive. As I mentioned before, the sole plate here, it's not only lighter, but it's a lot more rigid. So there's a little bit of bend and flex in the toe box area, but when you get into the heel, I mean, this is a really, really, really rigid sole plate here. So what that's going to translate into on the field is you're going to get more of a spring in your step. It's going to be a lot more snappy. So these felt really great to run in. They felt so light and quick on your toes. And then moving on to the touch on the ball, both these boots, because they have that nice plush kangaroo leather upper, the touch on the ball feels great. I did feel like on the 442s, the leather was a little bit more plush here, and just gave me maybe a slightly closer touch on the ball, which I really liked. I especially enjoyed just, juggling, dribbling, and shooting in the 442s. Now moving on to our final category, we're gonna be talking about the value of these two football boots. So for me, this is pretty simple. The Copa Mundial comes in at $170 retail, whereas the 442 comes in at $130. So based on the build quality and the different material used in these boots, I'd have to say I think the New Balance 442s are just a much better value. However, it may be important to note that all of the Copa Mundials that Adidas sells are still being made and manufactured in Germany, so that could have something to do with the higher price of the football boots, just to make sure that they have good margins there. But overall, they're both, I still think, pretty good value plays, but I think you're just getting more bang for your buck with the 442. So to wrap things up, these are both amazing football boots, and I think whichever one you go with, you're gonna make a good choice. If I were to make my personal recommendation though, I would say if you value most build quality and durability, you'd be best suited going with the Copa Mundials. However, if you're looking for something that's more lightweight and has a little bit better performance, I would go with the New Balance 442 V2 Pros. So that does it for today's video, and feel free to check out my full reviews for these two football boots in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.